Welcome to our tutorial about positioning controls. Let's go to File, New, and Website. Select an ASP.NET website. Let's accept the default location and click OK. In our tutorials about building web applications, I'm not interested in teaching you how to design a website per se, but how to program them. In this tutorial, I'm going to go through some basic concepts regarding how to position the controls on your web application. Now, first of all, when we start a new project inside the HTML body, we have form and division tags. We don't have to keep either one of these. In fact, we can delete both of them. Let's go to Design View to see what division looks like. In the Properties window, we can set the style. For example, let's choose Position. Let's make the width of the division 300 pixels and the height 200 pixels. We'll set the top margin at 20 pixels and the left margin at 30 pixels. From the drop-down menu on the right-hand side, we can choose from any one of a number of units of measurements: pixels, points, inches, centimeters, millimeters, percentage, and so on. Let's also select a background. Let's say green, and a border. A solid border will work with a width of 2 pixels. Let's make it black and click OK. Now let's go back to our source code. You see a style tag here now containing the information that we just defined: 300 pixels wide, 200 high, the top and left margins, the background color. This 6-digit letter number combination represents a color. Each pair of digits represents a shade of red, green, and blue, respectively. Let's go back to Design View. Now, let's take a button from the toolbox and drag it onto our division. Now, when I select the button, I'm able to reposition it on the division. Let's try to bring on another button. As you can see, I'm trying to drag the button, but it's not working. In the previous version of Visual Studio, there was what was called grid layout. Grid layout lets you drag your controls around the workspace and then position them precisely where you want it to. It's still possible if I go to the source view. The button tag is highlighted now. Press Enter. Now right-click and I'll paste a line of style code defining the position that I want: the left, top, etc. Here are open and close P tags. These represent paragraphs or the equivalent of a hard return. Let's go back to Design View. Now when I grab the button, I'm able to drag it around. Let's go back to Source View, and you see the left and top positions are now changed. We can apply absolute positions to our division as well. Let's right-click and copy. Now right-click and paste. Let's go back to Design View to see how it works. As you see, we're now able to drag our division freely around the workspace. For divisions, you can set up absolute positions in the Understyle property. Click OK. Let's delete this code here. And let's go back to Design View. Now we've only got our form. A word of caution: using an absolute position is convenient during design, but what happens in real life is that when your work gets to the end user and you test your work using, let's say, Internet Explorer 7, it looks and works just fine there, but it's possible that some of your users use previous browser versions, maybe even as old as Internet Explorer 4. That's not including text settings, optional settings, antivirus programs, and other types of restrictions. Basically, there can be some incompatibility trouble on the user's end. Now let's take a look at a table. Tables are easy to use and they're pretty straightforward. One more thing, see what's happened here? I dragged my table onto the form. If we go back to the source view, The table's highlighted, but it appears outside the form. I do need to drag it inside. Now the table's definitely inside the form. I can see where it starts and where it ends. Here are where the table rows start and end. We've got 3 table cells. Let's type some random text into the cells in Code View. Then return to Design View. Here's my text appearing in the 3 top cells. In the old design days, tables were used almost exclusively for web design and programming. You'd basically nest and stack your tables to organize your display the way you wanted. Let me delete this. And let's drag out a couple buttons from the toolbox. Maybe a text box too. Let's click Debug to see how it looks in the browser. If you get some kind of message like this, just click OK. Now we've got a preview of our controls inside the table. One more thing here. Let's stop debugging. When I select this text box control, I see a line of tags at the bottom of my workspace. It works like this. This button is inside this cell is inside this row, the row's inside the table, and the table is inside the form. You see that I can select either up or down. I select the table now, and now I'm going to set up a border and maybe some cell padding and spacing. Cell padding and cell spacing represent the thickness of the border between the cells. Now, when we run our program with cell padding and cell spacing enabled, we see that the positions of our controls are more easily visible. This or similar principles are often used in design time. You make a table or border, or the division visible, and it'll help you see where the controls are positioned. However, when you're done, and you're ready to put your application live, you make the borders invisible, or the cell padding and spacing values 0. A final note, it's very important before you release your product to test it on a few different browsers and using a few different settings. Again, remember that some of your end users may be using some very old browsers, or they might not even be using an Internet Explorer browser. This concludes our tutorial about positioning controls.